Well, good evening, and thank you for coming out, and anybody at home, thank you for tuning in. Have we heard about the YouTube yet? Is the YouTube up? It is up. Okay, so welcome YouTubers and Facebookers. What a crazy world we live in, huh? all this technology, I'm sure, seemed like a good idea at one point. But tonight we are at the end of this series. There's plenty more that could be said, and I should say one quick thing. This material is basically all drawn from a book called Tactics, and we've had that for sale here. And I probably should have made this announcement earlier. Truth is, when I sat down, I spent about 3 years doing the research and working out the details, and when I sat down and I wrote out everything that seemed like an important lesson, it came up to about 400 pages. And nobody in their right mind is publishing paperback 400-page books these days. So I knew it was too long. So what I did is I had to edit it down. And I took out roughly 150 pages that basically comes from the bad Kellogg era. Let's put it that way. A lot of more fine details and just details and a few whole topics maybe, but they were the less important ones. I took those out of the printed book. If that's something, if you're a real glutton for punishment and you want to read 400 pages, and God bless anybody who reads anything that I write. You write a book and then you find out if anybody cares. If they think it's important, will they actually read it? That's a lot of time. But anyhow, if you're really interested in the 400-page version, it's available as a Kindle. That was the deal I struck with the publisher, is that the paperback is sort of the condensed one, and the Kindle version or ebook version or whatever, I don't do that stuff, but whatever it is, that's known as the expanded edition, and it's actually a little bit cheaper. You can buy it for less money and get more words, and so you can consider that if you want to do that. But anyhow, here we are, end of the series, end of Earth's history. That's what we're talking about here. At this time, God's people face Satan's final attack, his most deceptive effort ever, and yet we have a promise to cling to. We'll talk about that in a minute. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Father, we just ask for more than human wisdom now. There's a lot of information. We pray that you'd help us to put the pieces together right. We have a knack for taking jigsaw puzzles and turning them into weird-looking things, but we just pray that you would help us to understand and to grasp and to see this stuff, this information, in ways that will be practical and useful and a blessing to us and to others. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay. We have a promise, right? God has promised he will not let us be tempted above what we are able. Have you ever claimed that promise? It's a great promise. But what do you think Satan thinks about that promise? And just imagine what he's, the claims he's making to the universe. It's like, yeah, God says we're going to have a test as to whether my government or his government's better. He won't even let me give them my best sales pitch. This is like tampering with the jury, tampering with the whole thing. This is not a fair test. He's got to be saying that. So that brings us to good news and bad news. The bad news is that at the end of time, the Lord has to turn the devil loose with no restrictions. The good news is that he's working to prepare his people so that even then, they will not be tested above what they are able to bear. Follow this. Oh, I should point this out, the little subtitle there, nothing new here. That's a key thought. We'll touch on that later on. But let's back to this idea. how are we ever going to resist the devil's temptations? Well, look at this. The followers of Christ know little of the plots which Satan and his hosts are forming against them. But he who sitteth in the heavens will overrule all these devices for the accomplishment of his deep designs. The Lord permits his people to be subjected to the fiery ordeal of temptation, not because he takes pleasure in their distress and affliction, but because this process is essential to their final victory. Follow that. This process of, distress, affliction, fiery temptation, is essential to their final victory. He could not, consistently with his own glory, shield them from temptation. For the very object of the trial is to prepare them to resist all the allurements of evil. That's the point. When we are ready for that, he can keep his promise. He'll not allow us to be tempted above what we're able. And he can allow the devil to waste all his temptations that are not going to do a thing anymore. But that's, I fear we may not be there yet. Well, let's go on. Another great classic Adventist statement, right? We have nothing to fear for the future, except as we shall forget the way the Lord has led us and his teaching in our past history. The key thought here is that our past history tells us stuff. It tells us everything we need if we're familiar with it. There's nothing new in the devil's attacks. Notice this. Satan deceives and corrupts the world, but in so doing is only carrying on his original work. He has introduced no new arguments. He has created no new empire of darkness from which to draw supplies for the furtherance of his deceptions. And sin that was sin in the beginning is sin today. And sin, the apostle declares, is the transgression of God's law. There's nothing new here. If we learn the lessons of Lucifer's rebellion in heaven, of Kellogg's apostasy, and other miscellaneous things. I mean, those are not the only two examples, but they happen to be, I think, the two best examples. But if we learn the lessons of the temptations and the deceits that the devil has, it's got to be a help. Let's put it that way. It's got to be a help. In these days, it is Satan's determined purpose to intensify sin by making it legal in the children of disobedience. Now she's talking, you'll see down a little bit further down, she's talking church and state. So this is laws. Any laws you're aware of in recent times that have made sin legal? Kind of interesting. He, Lucifer, is to reveal to the world and to heaven what is the order and result of a government carried on according to his ideas of administration and law. He is working with secret, yet with intense zeal, in both church and state, to cause men to throw off all the restraints of God's law and take a decided stand with him in the ranks of rebellion. But when his work is accomplished, the Lord will interpose and vindicate his honor as his of the universe. And this is just always the pattern. It's always that the devil comes up to a certain point. When he said in heaven, he says, I will not submit to the law of God. Then God says, okay, we're at a point of clarity. You got to go. When Judas betrayed Christ, that was a point of clarity. Now we can divide the line here, right? When Kellogg attacked the spirit of prophecy, that was a point of clarity. Now we can deal with things openly. Same story here. When his work is accomplished, the Lord will interpose. Okay. So we've looked at these parallels, and all of that, I believe, is to help us understand the stuff that's coming yet ahead. The omega on the bad side and the loud cry on the good side, right? Okay? The important thing to remember is the closing events are simply the full and final display of the principles and the methods, the tactics that have gone before. On both sides, good and evil. The devil has nothing new, And God's not going to bring in anything new. Well, the only thing he's going to bring in new is that he's going to demonstrate the same thing he demonstrated through Christ, but he's going to do it through people who were once participatory sinners. That is the new element. That is a new element. I don't have to give it that much. But anyhow, okay. Just as far as the tactics, as far as the methods, though, Satan has nothing new, and we don't want anything new. We want, I don't know, this is a place where you could say, give me that old-time religion. We want what Jesus did, right? We have been given a work identical to his work. Christ's method alone brings true success. We don't need to be creative here. We need to do what we're supposed to do. Christ's method alone will give true success. The great object that brought Christ to the earth was to reveal the Father. God is love. This was the great truth that Christ came to the world to reveal. The object of Christ's mission to the world was to reveal the Father. In all his ministry, all his self-denial and self-sacrifice, Christ's object was to reveal God to the world. Now notice, self-denial and self-sacrifice. That's a part of the package. That's how we're going to do it too. Okay? Well, okay. The trick is that now all this has to be done through God's people, you and me. The world needs today what it needed 1,900 years ago. We could go to 2,000 years ago now, I suppose. A revelation of Christ, right? What the world needs today is the light of Christ's example reflected from the lives of Christ-like men and women. That's the holdup. So back in 1893, when Kellogg was still in his good Kellogg phase, and he talked about the good works, that were supposed to power the loud cry, he was onto something, right? But it's even more than that. Hearts will be captivated, not by the glory of the man, but by the inward adorning of an abiding Christ. It is the revelation of Christ in the man that captivates the hearts of men and women. They behold the beautiful character of Christ revealed by good works. We've read this before, but let me read it again. God's purpose in committing to men and women the mission that he committed to Christ is to disentangle his followers from all worldly policy and to give them a work identical with the work that Christ did. And again, I'm not sure I can define worldly policy, but I'm pretty sure that anything that stops me from taking up a work identical to the work that Christ did is probably some form of worldly policy. And that bottom line there, a work identical, very strong word. The glory of the character of Christ can never be expressed in words. Remember, we saw this on Sabbath morning. Jesus could not portray his Father's character in a verbal description. Well, come on. If he can't do it, what are the odds that I can, right? The glory of the character of Christ can never be expressed in words. Human language is inadequate to reveal it. It must be made manifest in the life. It is to be manifest in the individual Christian, in the family, in the church, in the ministry of the Word, and in every institution established by God's people. Remember last night it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but medical missionary work was fire retardant. Remember that? It's because the fires came to Battle Creek because those institutions had failed to reflect the principles of Isaiah 58, she said. And so, all the way up from the individual to the family to the church to the ministry to every Adventist institution on the face of the earth is called to express the glory of the character of Christ. Christ, the great medical missionary, is our example. He healed the sick and preached the gospel. In his service, healing and teaching were linked closely together. Today, they are not to be separated. She says that in, half a dozen different ways over and over in different places. They always go together. The Holy Spirit never has and never will in the future divorce the medical missionary work from the gospel ministry. They cannot be divorced. Bound up with Jesus Christ, the ministry of the word and the healing of the sick are one. The union of Christ-like work for the body and Christ-like work for the soul is the true interpretation of the gospel. This is how the loud cry goes forward. This is the loud cry. Again, I like this statement. This is a great statement. Christ-like work for the body and Christ-like work for the soul. The point is, if we in fact are representing God, the goal is to help people. To help people as much as they will let us help them. So I am not just a leaf raker. I'm not just a doctor. I'm not just a surgeon. I'm all of that, plus I'm a missionary. Because if somehow in my raking of leaves or my being a doctor or a nurse or whatever else, I can touch the heart of that person and they're receptive, then I can help them more. And so I don't know, I don't want to paint myself worse than I am, but sometimes I guess I say I get a little bit impatient with people. Well, let's just do this much, and then maybe they'll find the Lord on their own or something. What in the world is that all about? Do I want to help the people or not? If I want to help the people, I want to help the people all that I can possibly help the people. And there's no greater help than helping them find the Lord. So, anyhow, okay. This is a fascinating statement. Ellen White writing, she says, I have been surprised that we have seen so little of the working and manifestation of Satan's wrath. As Lucifer sees that we are making efforts to work the cities as if we meant to give the last message, his wrath will be aroused and he will employ every device in his power to hinder the work. Okay, now what does that mean? Let's just unpack this one a little bit. I'm going to take that phrase, as if we... I'm going to take that to mean, hey, why don't we follow the directions this time? Yeah, it keeps fading out. Yeah? Higher on the mic. Okay, am I doing something on the... Okay, maybe that'll help. Okay, yeah, as if we meant to. Sometimes we do things as if we mean to play around. Sometimes we aren't really serious. Sometimes we're just kind of going through the motions to, I don't know, make ourselves feel good or something. Or maybe we just flat don't know what we ought to be doing. I don't know. Probably some of both. As Lucifer sees we're making efforts to work the cities as if we meant to give the message. Okay, what does Ellen White say about working the cities? Well, what a coincidence. Medical missionary work is the door through which the third angel's message is to find access to the large cities. Oh, look at that. We're right back where we started again with medical missionary work. Just keep going round and round. I don't care which way you look at it. That's where you're going to end up. But there's a thought in this one that just I find stunning. Lucifer is worried about cities. I've always kind of looked, oh man, cities, yeah, boy, they're pretty evil. They're just hopeless. It's practically a write-off. Apparently Lucifer doesn't see it that way. And when you stop and think about it, it actually makes sense. Yes, it's true that the vast majority of people in the big cities are in the service of Lucifer. But they're not happy there. It's kind of a miserable life. And I think Lucifer knows that if somebody comes along and actually shows his team something better, a way to be happy, a way to be more blessed than constantly trying to grab and keep for yourself, I think he's nervous. I also find it fascinating. In about the last 6-7 years, there's been quite an uptick within the church of interest in medical missionary work, all its broad forms. I'm not a prophet, but I'm not convinced that the weirdness of the world that we see going on today is totally unrelated to that. Do you know what I'm saying? Has anyone here participated in any of the Pathway to Health events, for instance? Yeah, those are neat. That's kind of shaking the cities a little bit. That's laying some groundwork. It's not the end-all, be-all method to do everything, but I think it's done some really good work. And I would not be surprised. Remember, 1892, they'd started an orphanage, they'd started a visiting nurses program, and they'd just barely started the Christian help bands. And Ellen White said the loud cry had begun. I think we've done a lot more than what they had done in 1892. To me, it's entirely feasible to believe that we are, in fact, in a resurgence of the beginning of the loud cry. It's just the beginning. Trust me. It hasn't made it to the front page of the Wall Street Journal yet, or the New York Times, or anything. But could we be started? Could the recognition? I hope so. I see it happening everywhere I go. Of course, I tend to go places where people are interested in that. but still, I see something happening, and I'm kind of pumped with it. Okay, got to hurry on. When men begin, I got to stop this one here just a second. Okay. There's one thing that I find really, really, really dangerous, and I would just want to kind of just stamp it out right now, okay? And that's this idea, well, the Lord wanted us to do all this medical missionary stuff and all those sanitariums and things, but man, it's 100 years later and it's just so close to the end of time. I don't think we have time to do that. Yeah, I want to bet. When men begin to weave in the human threads to compose the pattern of the web, the Lord is in no hurry. He waits until men shall lay down their own human inventions and will accept the Lord's way and the Lord's will. I don't think there's a shortcut around it, folks. The controversy is not going to end without the manifestation of the character of God, and the character of God can only be manifested in certain ways. So let's just, bite the bullet, buck up, let's do this thing, okay? That's where we're at, okay? Going on. Okay, so we looked at this the other day. Remember Lucifer's accusations? And we saw that the first 6 had been completely demolished by Christ's life. Number 9 will just evaporate when 7 and 8 are proven, when God's proven correct on 7 and 8. So really, we can kind of zero in now and say, hey, this is what we're arguing over. It's just 7 and 8. Now, I'm going to warn you that number 7 is deep, deep, deep. Okay? We're not going to plumb the depths of it tonight. But Lucifer said, God, your law is arbitrary. It is what it is just because you said that's what it is, so that's why you can change it. And you can think of a lot of laws that are like that. Well, the speed limit is 60 miles an hour, but, we think it's a little low, so let's make it 65. Yeah, it's easy to do. Governments do that all the time. And Lucifer said, God, you can just change it. Just change it. Come on, don't be stubborn and ridiculous. Just change it. And God said, the law cannot be changed. He never said, I'm not going to change that. I like it that way. He didn't ever say that. He said the law cannot be changed. Okay. So the trick here that is involved with this is that Lucifer came back with his counterpunch on number 8. Okay. He says, well, God, if your law can't be changed at all, anytime, ever, in any way, that means you can never forgive someone. Because if they ever violate the law, bam, you can't forgive them. You may have to think that one around a little bit. it makes more sense than it may sound like. We think of it as being, oh, well, it's easy to forgive things. I mean, it's like, the judge just goes, case dismissed, boom, out of court. That's easy. But that's because it's the kind of a law that was made by somebody saying, this is what the law is. Laws that aren't made by somebody saying them, they're a lot harder to deal with. And I'm just going to leave that there for right now. But we can pick up part of the story at least. Why are these two things still there? Well, because they involve forgiving people. And guess who needs forgiveness? That's us. Jesus couldn't demonstrate this part because he never sinned. This is for us. And it's for God. Check out this statement. I love this one. In the character of God's people, a living testimony will be born that will contradict the fallacy of Satan, who has declared that the law of Jehovah is arbitrary and holds its subjects under a cruel bondage. It's our characters at the end of time. When God says, okay, Lucifer, go ahead, have at it. You can do anything you want. And remember, that's so much like the book of Job. The book of Job is a marvelous little parable of this whole thing, right? It's our characters that make the difference. That's what God's been waiting on. So let's do a little summary of God's work at the end of time. The Lord desires through his people to answer Satan's charges by showing the results of obedience to right principles. I just forgot to read that one statement in. Okay, now the summary of God's work. God's final work uses the same method that Christ used during his life on earth, the revelation of the character of God. God's final work requires that human beings take up the same manner of work that Jesus practiced during his life on earth, which was unselfish ministry. The revelation of God's character cannot be accomplished through words alone. Acts of mercy and healing are also necessary. And in short, God's final work is self-sacrifice and self-denial, exemplified in medical missionary work, or whatever else you want to call it. You can call it anything you want. It doesn't matter what you call it. It's the same idea. Displaying God's character of love. Okay? All of that maybe helps us understand this statement. The truth for this time, the third angel's message, is to be proclaimed with a loud voice, meaning with increasing power, as we approach the great final test. This test, this great final test, must come to the churches in connection with the true ... 4 dots. Yeah, okay, whatever. True what? The great final test comes to the churches in connection with some issue of true and false. What true thing is it in connection with? Pardon me? True witness? Yeah, that's a good one. Commandments? Which commandment in particular might come to mind there? The fourth, yeah, the true Sabbath as opposed to a false Sabbath. Yeah, those things are all good. It's not what this statement says, though. I know I kind of set you up for that one. This statement says something else. This test must come to the churches in connection with the true medical missionary work. A work that has the great physician to dictate and preside in all it comprehends. Well, why is that, I wonder? Because it has to do with everything, including the Sabbath. Okay. Well, we'll touch this idea a little bit later on more, but anyhow, let's get back to basic idea of the devil's final attack. Okay, we've been actually talking here about how God's going to go forward, what the loud cry is going to actually be like. Let's flip over to the enemy for a moment here. Ellen White doesn't say a lot about the Omega per se. She says, let me think. She says it would come in a little while. It made her tremble. It would be, is it surprising? Is that how the statement goes? Something like that. And she says those who reject the warning will be taken in by it. That's about all she actually says about the Omega by name. So how are we ever supposed to know anything about the Omega? Well, it's kind of an interesting thing. This prophecy about the Alpha of apostasy, the Alpha was clearly Kellogg. And the Omega yet to come. See, and so in the early days when that prophecy was made, everybody was thinking, oh, well, the Alpha is what he's doing now, but like next year he's going to do something even worse. That's the Omega. Well, it didn't really happen that way, and Kellogg was disfellowshipped in 1907, and his connection with the church kind of declined rapidly after that. By about the 1920s, people were kind of scratching their heads and saying, I don't know, I wonder what the Omega is. That's a puzzle. And somebody, I think I maybe know, but I'm not positive, somebody came up with I'm sure, a very sincere, creative idea. They said, the Alpha is the first letter of the alphabet, way over here on this side, and the Omega is the last letter of the alphabet, way over on that side. So the Omega is the opposite of the Alpha. Okay. That idea held from the 1920s up into the 1980s. Really kind of fascinating thing, and I don't know that it hurt us any, because maybe it really wasn't time to worry about those details through those decades anyhow. But, reasoning from the opposite of something is really kind of a challenge. So, for instance, if I asked you, what is the opposite of salt? You would say? I think I heard both answers. I usually get, some people say sugar, and other people say pepper. Yeah, that's confusing. Okay. I mean, how can you nail anything down on the basis of an opposite? So what's the opposite of a cat? No, it's not a dog. That's crazy. Cats are like little tiny animals. The opposite of a cat is a giraffe. I mean, that's obvious, right? So for 60 years, we thrashed around trying to figure out what the opposite of pantheism was. And we came up with a number of ideas. None of them really worked out. Let's just put it that way. Eventually, believe it or not, all this newfangled technology actually helped. And it was when the first, it wasn't even computerized, but any of you remember the Ellen White concordance on Laserdisc? Anybody remember that? Yeah. Oh man, what a kludge. Anyhow, but that was the first time that we had any ability to kind of exhaustively cover anything in the spirit of prophecy. And I remember I wrote an article on this in 1987, when we'd just gotten our new Laserdisc gizmo doodaddy thingy, and oh man, it was like, you couldn't even read the spirit of prophecy on it. It was like a Strong's Concordance for Ellen White, is really what it was. And it, 3 big discs that had to feed into this crazy machine. And you look up the word and you say, oh, it's on frame number 67,482. And you punch that in, and then you go there. Oh, now you can see like a Strong's Concordance listing of all these words. Okay, but it gave me the ability to look up every time she ever used a certain word. And I had no inkling I was going to come to this conclusion. But every expression she used talking about Kellogg, she spoke of the Alpha and the Omega. She spoke of a train of heresies. She spoke of, there's another one. Anyhow, whatever, every expression, I tracked down every single use of those words. And there was never a hint of an opposite. And so I came to a conclusion I had not foreseen whatsoever. And an article got published, and I said, the Alpha is like an acorn. The Omega is the oak tree. And that was 1987. That was not easy to believe, just to be honest. I mean, Adventists getting sucked into pantheism and mysticism. At that point, if there was a danger to the church, we would have said, oh no, it's like some sort of a scientific atheism or something, but this idea of getting sucked into the mystical thing, I had people who politely laughed at me. I'm sure they were polite. Anyhow, nobody's laughing about that anymore, unfortunately. So because of this acorn to oak tree relationship, the best way to understand the Omega is just to look at what Ellen White says the Alpha would have become. Well, back in the Alpha days, the most obvious problem was pantheism, the belief that God is not a specific person, but some sort of all-pervading non-entity, whatever that might be. Under that belief, all men and women, saints and sinners alike, became at least partially divine, because God was everywhere, right? And the heavenly sanctuary became wherever God is. That was the meaning of the name of the book, Living Temple. This is the living temple. Yeah, okay, that wasn't really good. Let's back that up. How many times did I pat myself on the chest? There we go. Okay. That's what Kellogg meant when he titled the book Living Temple, because God dwells within, you see. And that was everyone, not just God's people, in which, there is the hope of glory, Christ within. Beyond the philosophical elements, there were also clear indications of direct supernatural involvement. We saw some of this the other night when we looked at Kellogg, but anyhow, we'll catch just a little bit more here. Oh, okay, no, I don't. Okay. So, yeah, we saw all the stuff about, how the devil was at Kellogg's shoulder as he was writing Living Temple and things like that. But, there is a tendency for us as Seventh-day Adventists to associate spiritualism solely with what some people would classify as spiritism, right? Spirits the dead type of thing. It's interesting, though, that Ellen White, certainly she got a whole chapter in Great Controversy on, can our dead speak to us, right? And that is an issue, and we are told it will be an issue, an even greater issue at the end of time. But spiritualism is more than just Aunt Margaret coming back from the grave. Notice how she talks about it here. Spiritualism declares that there is no death. Okay, that's where you get the spirits thing. No sin. No judgment. No retribution. That men are unfallen demigods. That desire is the highest law. And that man is accountable only to himself. The barriers that God has erected to guard truth, purity, and reverence are broken down, and many are thus emboldened in sin. Spiritualism is a bigger thing. Okay, well, let's see. Perhaps the most basic thing you remember about Satan's end-time deceptions is they are counterfeits. Everything's a counterfeit. He's got Sunday for Sabbath. He's got the Mass for Christ's intercession in the heavenly sanctuary. He's got LGBTQ alphabet for marriage. He always does everything with a counterfeit. So, as the crowning act in the great drama of deception, Satan himself will personate Christ. Yeah, you remember that. It's great controversy. In different parts of the earth, Satan will manifest himself among men as a majestic being of dazzling brightness, resembling the description of the Son of God given by John in the Revelation. The glory that surrounds him is unsurpassed by anything that mortal eyes have yet beheld. The shout of triumph rings out upon the air, Christ has come, Christ has come. Okay, well, that's a counterfeit. But that's not where his counterfeiting starts. Before the final visitation of God's judgments upon the earth, there will be among the people of God such a revival of primitive godliness as has not been witnessed since apostolic times. What do you suppose that revival of primitive godliness might look like? Pardon me? Medical missionary work. Yeah, right? The enemy of souls desires to hinder this medical missionary work. And before the time for such a movement shall come, he will endeavor to prevent it by introducing a counterfeit medical missionary work. Under a religious guise, Satan will seek to extend his influence over the Christian world. What would that counterfeit look like? Yeah, it's going to look like medical missionary work. Well, how do I know that? I don't know. I just kept reading the book. That's what it says. The last great delusion is soon to open before us. Antichrist is to perform his marvelous works in our sight. So closely will the counterfeit resemble the true that it will be impossible to distinguish between them except by the Holy Scriptures. By their testimony, every statement, every miracle must be tested. What kind of miracles are we looking at here, likely? Satan can present a counterfeit so closely resembling the truth that it deceives those. This is a great statement. Satan can present a counterfeit so closely resembling the truth that it deceives those who are willing to be deceived. What does it take to qualify as willing to be deceived? A lack of the love of truth? That's correct. But she phrases it a little more pointedly, maybe. What does it take to be willing to be deceived? Yeah, kind of. Notice what she says. Those who desire to shun the self-denial and self-sacrifice demanded by the truth. That's all it takes. Because self-denial and self-sacrifice is the character of God, and we're called to exemplify the character of God. But if I want to do that without self-denial and self-sacrifice, then I've created a counterfeit. So where do self-denial and self-sacrifice show up? Medical missionary work. It's always self-denial and sacrifice. I mean, even if it's just raking leaves, you don't have to be the medical part, but helping other people is always going to cost you time or effort or resources of some kind or money that's the whole point. You're giving them something. Self-denial and self-sacrifice. Medical missionary work is nothing more than the continuous practice of intelligent, missionary-minded self-denial and self-sacrifice, which is exactly why miracles are so cool. Not only do they show supernatural power, but they take the hard work out of helping people. Hey, if I can heal you by smacking you on the forehead, that's a lot faster than giving you a whole batch of hydrotherapy treatments. Incidentally, do you remember from our last meeting what God says will prepare us to accept Satan's miracles? The light is given to me in regard to the poor understanding of those that have been in the truth, that these sophistries, this mysticism, Kellogg's mysticism, and doing away with the personality of God and with the personality of Christ will get the whole room of the heart all ready for these miracles that Satan will come to work right in our midst. Where? Some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. Wonderful scenes with which Satan will be closely connected will soon take place. God's word declares that Satan will work miracles. He will make people sick and then will suddenly remove from them his satanic power. They will then be regarded as healed. These works of apparent healing will bring Seventh-day Adventists to the test. Many who have had great light will fail to walk in the light because they have not become one with Christ. His instruction is not palatable to them. Which part of his instruction do you think might be unpalatable? Self-denial, self-sacrifice. Yeah. Oh, come on. How obvious is that? The natural heart does not like self-denial and self-sacrifice. We've got to learn to love it. That's That's what it boils down to. We've got to learn to love it. Okay, back to Satan. Shout of triumph, we read all that, right? Christ has come, Christ has come. The people prostrate themselves in adoration before him while he lifts up hands and pronounces a blessing upon them as Christ blessed his disciples when he was upon the earth. His voice is soft and subdued. I can't do that. Anyhow, his voice is soft and subdued, yet full of melody. In gentle, compassionate tones, he presents some of the same gracious heavenly truths which the Savior uttered. He heals the diseases of the people. And then in his assumed character of Christ, he claims to have changed Sabbath to Sunday. He heals the diseases of the people. Why does he do that? Well, because he has to do that, because Satan will come in to deceive, if possible, the very elect. He claims to be Christ, and he is coming in pretending to be the great medical missionary. How can you pretend to be the great medical missionary without healing a few folks? Okay. Well, back on Friday night, talking about Lucifer, we put up a list of the tactics of rebellion. These are the things that Lucifer did. These are also the things that Kellogg did. Every one of them. Exploit position, trust as long as possible, hide intentions from others, imply or insinuate without clear assertions, distort others' perceptions, manipulate, maintain plausible deniabilities, shift responsibility to others, just plain lie if you have to, abandon discredited positions without accepting responsibility for having advocated them, cite supporters as evidence of correctness, and appeal to sympathy. I will guarantee these things are going to happen again. You will see them all, just because the devil's not going to give up on anything that's worked in the past. What we don't know is who's going to be using them. And sadly, that will be surprising in some cases. Anyone who desires to avoid self-denial and self-sacrifice will eventually find one or more of these that they really like better. That could be me. That could be you. I pray it's not. We shouldn't be overly suspicious of other people, but neither should we be so naive as to allow someone to lead us away from Christ's methods, which always include self-denial and self-sacrifice. Well, in Kellogg's day, Ellen White wrote this one fairly comprehensive statement about what would happen if Kellogg just was allowed to go on. I think this is the best portrayal of the Omega, so we want to go through that quickly. The enemy of souls has sought to bring in the supposition that a great reformation was to take place among Seventh-day Adventists, and that this reformation would consist in giving up the doctrines which stand as the pillars of our faith and engaging in a process of reorganization. Were this reformation to take place, what would result? I'm going to say the Omega. Okay, so here's our description. The principles of truth that God in his wisdom has given to the remnant church would be discarded. Now, I don't know, but notice this. She already mentioned here giving up doctrines. There's my button. There we go. Right? I already mentioned giving up doctrines. And now she's talking about the principles of truth. Maybe that's doctrines. But self-denial and self-sacrifice are principles of truth too. Service to others are principles of truth too. Commitment to the Lord, that's a principle of truth. Our religion would be changed. The fundamental principles that have sustained the work for the last 50 years would be accounted as error. A new organization would be established. Books of a new order would be written. A system of intellectual philosophy would be introduced. The founders of this system would go into the cities and do a wonderful work. That would be Kellogg down in Chicago, right? The Sabbath, of course, would be lightly regarded as also the God who created it. Nothing would be allowed to stand in the way of the new movement. There you get a little picture of the driving attitude, okay? Force is a principle which is found only in the devil's government. The leaders would teach that virtue is better than vice. Oh, wow, great. I'm glad for that much. But God being removed, they would place their dependence on human power, which without God is worthless. Their foundation would be built on the sand, and storm and tempest would sweep away the structure. I want you to notice especially this last sentence. In English class, we would call this an allusion, right? It's a subtle reference to some other literary work. In this case, it's the reference to the wise man built his house upon a rock, right? The key thing in that parable is that there are two houses, but there's only one storm. It's the same storm. It's not that God says, oh, look, there's a righteous man there. I'm going to send him some April showers so he can have Mayflowers. That'll be really sweet. But this evil sinner over here, oh, man, he's a real rat, so I'm going to hit him with a Cat 5 hurricane. That's not the way it is. Two houses, they look the same. The difference is the foundation. The storm comes, same storm, one stands, one falls. How's that work? The wise man's house was not shielded from the storm, it simply endured it. The wicked man's house didn't have what it took. What is the storm and tempest? I'm going to suggest it's what we call the little time of trouble. It's when the world starts falling apart, even worse than it's fallen apart already. Trust me, things can get worse. Never underestimate the devil's ability to make things worse. I'm no prophet, but it's not hard to see how some things could get really whacked out here pretty quickly. Financially, politically, international relations, military, the medical system. Everything's pretty much bounced on a knife edge. One good nasty flu virus come through, could wreak havoc. Few financial crises, somebody hitting the wrong button at the wrong time and sending a missile where it probably ought not to have gone. Any of these things could be really bad and could really, really go south on us pretty quickly, and that's exactly what we should be expecting. In the last scenes of this earth's history, war will rage. There will be pestilence, plague, and famine. The waters of the deep will overflow their boundaries. Property and life will be destroyed by fire and flood. Talk to the folks in Australia about fire. They're getting some of it. Perilous times are before us. The whole world will be involved in perplexity and distress. Disease of every kind will be upon the human family, and such ignorance as now prevails concerning the laws of health would result in great suffering and the loss of many lives that might be saved. Is there any value in teaching a little health reform here? You could save their life. What to do about that, right? If you are a competent physician, I am not, but those who are, you are qualified to do tenfold more good as a missionary for God than if you were to go forth merely as a preacher of the word. I would advise young men and women to give heed to this matter. It's not that everybody needs to become a doctor. Actually, there's a really fascinating passage where Ellen White says, not everybody should go to medical school. Some of you should just get a bunch of good medical books and read it up on your own, and you can learn just as much. She says that. It's kind of a mind blower in our day and age. But we should be intelligent in regard to health. In fact, this next statement tells us so. As religious aggression subverts the liberties of our nation, those who would stand for freedom of conscience will be placed in unfavorable positions for their own sake. What's that mean? For their own sake. Who's going to benefit out of this? We will. Yeah. This is a proverbial word to the wise, right? For their own sake, they should, while they have opportunity, become intelligent in regard to disease, its causes, prevention, and cure. And those who do this will find a field of labor anywhere. There will be suffering ones, plenty of them, who will need help, not only among those of our own faith, but largely among those not of the truth, those who know not the truth, This is great missionary opportunity. God's followers will be ministering to the people. both their physical and their spiritual health. They'll be doing the same thing Jesus did when he was here. And what will Satan's followers be doing? Much the same, in appearance, at least, until the storm and tempest sweeps away their structure. But how could this storm sweep away the devil's house, but not the Lord's house? I mean, face it, we're talking humanitarian movements here. So God's people are doing medical missionary work. They're helping people. The world is doing what the world does along those lines. They're going to have a lot more people, a lot more money, a lot more supplies. They're going to be better equipped, better situated, better everything. So how is it that the time of trouble sweeps away their structure, but not God's structure? Is the Lord working a miracle to protect his people? No. Both houses face the same storm. What's the difference? The foundation. The very foundation of Christ's mission was self-denial and self-sacrifice. But selfishness lies at the foundation of all sin. Just picture it. Things are getting tough. It's getting to be a dog-eat-dog world out there. Food's getting short. And here I am. I'm working on the devil's team, and I'm giving away food. Up to a point. Oh, you got any more of that? What do you mean you don't have any more of that? That's less of food? No more food? I ain't giving that away. I'm keeping that. Meanwhile, back in God's team, it comes down to exactly where Jesus deliberately put the disciples one time. He turned to Philip and he says, Philip, there's a lot of people here. Why don't we feed them? And Philip said, that would cost a lot of money. I think the implication was, we don't have it. And Jesus said, yeah, well, have them sit down. And he took care of it. Now, I am not necessarily predicting that we will see that exact sort of a thing with the multiplication of food, the way Jesus multiplied the loaves and the fishes. But what I am saying is that even at that time, especially at that time, when God's people have nothing, they keep serving. I don't know how it works. But imagine the witnessing opportunity. Here's a guy. He looks hungry. I've got a sandwich. Say, man, when was the last time you ate? You look pretty hungry. I haven't ate food for 3 days. Now, here's a sandwich. Now, this is a guy who's still got some good principles in him. He still understands gratitude. He still understands value. He's not utterly selfish. And he says, I can't take your food, man. What do you eat? And I say, God takes care of that for me. My bread and water is sure. You don't have that. You need the sandwich. But if you'd like to know how God could take care of you too, I could give you a little Bible study. That's a pretty punchy witnessing situation, I'd say. Just the very fact that these people continue when they should be dead. I mean, they can't buy or sell, right? They've all lost their houses, they've all lost their jobs, or whatever, I don't know the exact circumstances, but it's not good. The world is against them, and they keep serving the world. Mind is blown. And what's crazy is that that's going to be what offends the world the most. Is you're not doing it our way. They're probably going to pass laws against feeding hungry people if you don't get it through the United Way or something. I don't know what they're going to do. The foundation of Christianity is Christ our righteousness. Just because there's another foundation statement there. Well, let's see. Let's go on. In the last great conflict of the controversy with Satan, those who are loyal to God will see every earthly support cut off. That's in Desire of Ages. I used to read that and I'd say, well, that sounds tough. I mean, every earthly support, come on, that's got to be a problem, right? That's what it means when you can't buy or sell, I guess. But every earthly support is cut off, and I'd think, wow, how will we ever make it through that time period? And then I was reading one time, and I ran into this statement, Volume 4 of the Testimonies. It is safe to let go every earthly support and to take the hand of him who lifted up and saved the sinking disciple on the stormy sea. It's safe. Cool. It may be hard, it may be tough, but it's safe. We can deal with it. We'll just have to grit our teeth and tough it through. But man, it's so easy now with computers just to do a little tap, 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 tap. And that thing about every earthly support has just kind of caught my attention. I'll just see if she ever uses that statement somewhere else, or that phrase somewhere else. Oh yeah, she does. We can never perfect a full Christian experience until every earthly support is removed and the soul centers its entire affections about God. So here's this terrible thing that I saw in Desire of Ages. Oh, that's hard, terrible experience. That's exactly what we've been thinking we wanted all along. That's where we're going. Well, Satan erected his standard revolt against God. In heaven, he has revealed a persevering determination to establish his empire governed by laws and replenished with resources independent of God. I really haven't developed the idea like I do sometimes, but it always comes down to resources. If I either trust God to supply the resources that I need, or I have to do it myself. That was Lucifer's thing. It always comes down to resources. And so he's trying to replenish his kingdom with resources independent of God. I'm not sure what that means. I don't know how. There's a lot about the spiritual realities that I don't understand, and I'm perfectly clear that I don't understand because of this next statement. Satan is the head of the fallen angels. He supplies them with vital force. That's an expression that she usually uses to talk about life. I don't know what that means. I'm just telling you that, there's stuff out there I don't understand, and the supplying with resources, that's part of it. I don't understand, but I can see what he's trying to do. Okay, so what's it going to look like? Well, the storm and tempest, the time of the great final test, the time of the Omega apostasy, and the time of the loud cry. What's it going to look like? Well, the devil is always going to be trying to separate healing from soul winning. He's been doing that forever, right? He's always going to use mistaken science. There's no real surprises there. Devil's always tried to do that. Science is good, of course, until it comes in conflict with inspiration. And when it's in conflict, then we can know that there's something, somebody dropped a decimal point or something. There's something out of whack with the science. Okay, let's move on. As with Lucifer in heaven, as with Judas in the time of Christ, as with Kellogg, we will always find a derision of standards and doctrines and the minimization of the value of inspiration, spirit prophecy. People don't always attack viciously. Sometimes they just make fun of it. One of the most dangerous influences in the church today, I believe, is a tendency to make light of important issues. And sad to say, there are some particular people who have a real gift for comedy and perfect comedic timing and inflection, and they just have a gift for comedy. And when they turn that loose on the church and its doctrines and its standards, it's deadly. By a careless sneer, a turn of the head, or words of scorn and derision. A wrongdoer may set in motion an influence freighted with evil. An evil insinuation, once started, will spread rapidly, carried from mind to mind. It was by the expression of such thoughts that Satan placed in the minds of the angels that rebellion spread among them. When you see or when you hear religious comedy, I suggest you get out of there. So even if the derision is kind of funny, especially if it's kind of funny, remember who pioneered the development, right? Okay. Next item, last item on the list so far. Selfish church officials. Now there's going to be selfishness all around, but what's going to hurt will be selfish church officials. It's not going to be all church officials. Deliver us from that. I am confident it won't be. There will be some. I'm confident of that. You know, the sad thing is that every single evil practice, as far as the church went, that Kellogg picked up, he picked up as a matter of fighting fire with fire. And Ellen White and her son Willie White both agree that those evil practices originated at either the General Conference or the Review and Herald, which of course were all right there in Battle Creek. So it was like, in the neighborhood, right? Fortunately, other people who picked up bad weapons, well, many of them accepted reproof. Some didn't, some left the church. But many of them accepted the reproof when it was given. Kellogg didn't accept the reproof. So that's why he's identified with it. But anyhow, not all, but many of those who claim to be children of God have become so self-centered, so selfish, so full of idolatry of self that they are jealous, mistrustful of everyone whom they have an idea will, as they suppose, outshine them. Therefore, there is strife and bitterness, evil thinking and evil speaking, emulation and hatred. This is the reason the Lord cannot endure the sentiments that are being brought into the life and character of the responsible men in the Review and Herald office. That was just a particular snapshot. What was this, 1902? That was shortly before the fire, by the way. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to point fingers at the Review. I'm not trying to point fingers at the General Conference or the Michigan Conference or the Timbuktu Conference, or, I'm just saying there will be some. Don't be surprised. Inappropriate spending. A lot of money got wasted in Kellogg's day. A lot of money will be wasted. Sometimes, I think, has been wasted. It's unfortunate. But selfishness in the heart distorts the judgment. Misdirection of workers, just as the money as a resource can be wasted, the time and manpower of the church workers can also be wasted. And that happened then. I'm pretty confident it's going to happen again. Shifting strategies, you will find this. If this approach doesn't work, we'll try this approach. If somebody blows the whistle on this particular set of terms, we change the names. That goes on all the time in the broader Christian world, and I would say occasionally in Adventism. Shift, just put a new name on it. It takes your critics about a year to even figure out what happened. And you just bought yourself a year of time with nobody complaining about you. Kellogg went deep into contracts and lawyers. If you can't work together with someone, from your perspective, they're not working with you, right? And if they're not working with me, but they're supposed to work with me, how do I get them to work with me? I have them sign a contract. If they don't keep the contract, I get the lawyer, bam, slap them down. Ellen White had a lot to say on that. None of it was positive. Yeah, that was an issue back then. I expect to see it again. Dishonest officials. just trying to paint a progression here. Selfishness is one thing, but after you've tried a few things, you don't get what you want. Selfishness clung to brings you to the point of being just flat out dishonest. Kellogg did that. Some others did that. It's going to happen again. The leaders of the Jews yielded to the temptations of Satan, and God could not give them the blessings he designed them to have because they did not obey his voice. This experience will be repeated in the last years of the history of the people of God, who have been established by his grace and power. That's the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Men whom he has greatly honored will, in the closing scenes of this earth's history, pattern after ancient Israel. You cannot afford to follow any human being to the bitter end. Well, dishonesty leads to plots and conspiracies. Kellogg did it. It's going to happen again. There will be clueless lay members. The vast majority of the church had no idea what was going on in the Kellogg years. All of a sudden, when it became public, they were like, "Oh, I thought he was doing. I thought he was a good man." I'm sorry. We really ought to. If you want to be a part of God's church, pay attention to God's church. Become involved in God's church. Know something about what's going on in God's church. There will be appeal to reputation, appeal to sympathy, whatever it is. Hey, I'm a doctor, or I'm a pastor, or I'm a conference president, or I'm a whatever, I'm a lawyer, I'm an important guy, I'm a good guy, you got to trust me. Well, yeah, trust them. As long as they say what Jesus is saying. And there will be appeal to sympathy. How come you're always picking on me? Man, what have I done wrong? Yeah. Always. Hypnosis and mysticism, don't put too much into the exact order in which I'm putting these up here there. It's likely the sequence is going to be different in one place to another place. Just don't take that as gospel truth or anything. Maybe more than most, these last two, hypnosis and mysticism, are hard to specify exactly in their placing. I put them there kind of to get them on the list. I put them near the end because they are among the more seriously significant. But don't think that means that I'm saying they're all the way off in the future someplace. There have been concerns in this department since the 1980s. I first ran into forms of hypnosis in a church meeting a long way from here in 1985. Neurolinguistic programming is a form of hypnosis. There's no denying that elements of mysticism are being promoted in certain Adventist circles. Unfortunately, that's what my book, Tremble, is all about. Ellen White, talking about this mysticism thing. This is important. I want to touch on it. I see I'm long here. I'm sorry. Bear with me. Watch it in 2 sections, perhaps. We need not the mysticism that is in this book, Living Temple. Those who entertain these sophistries will soon find themselves in a position where the enemy can talk with them and lead them away from God. Talk with them. That's exactly what they want, is to talk with God. Right? The heart of mysticism is the practice of human-controlled contact with the supernatural. Essentially, mystics claim that they can, at their own convenience, establish direct contact with the deity they worship. How they do that may vary, but they've got their methods, they've got their rituals, they've got their mantras, their incantations. This is a big thing. Your ideas, speaking to Kellogg, are so mystical, they're destructive to the real substance. The minds of some are becoming confused in regard to the foundation of our faith. If you allow your mind to become thus diverted, you will give a wrong mold to the work that has made us what we are, Seventh-day Adventists. Mysticism is all through the world. It's in every religion out there. You've got the Catholic mystics all the way from the Desert Fathers in the 2nd century right through the mystics of the Thomas of Avila and St. Francis and all these guys through the Dark Ages, all the way to the current Pope, who is the first Jesuit Pope, and by definition, anyone who's come through the Jesuit order is a mystic, because that's a required function of the Jesuit practices and oaths. But it's not just Catholics. In Judaism, it's Kabbalah. In Islam, it's Sufi. In Hinduism, it's every priest. In Buddhism, it's every believer. In atheism, it's hallucinogenic drug users. Pretty much the same experience. And they all recognize it. They all see the commonality. And so it's really, really big when it comes to ecumenicism. Maybe you remember this whole thing with the Pope and Francis Copeland? Francis, what's his name? Kenneth Copeland. There we go. Pope Francis. There we go. I'm really not too up on my Protestant charismatic leaders, but anyhow, apparently he's a big one. Did you watch the video? A year, 2 years ago, something like it? Remember, that was all mediated by Tony Palmer. I don't know if you can read what it says there underneath. Cute little title. Minister of Reconciliation, right? This is the guy who got up and said, the protest is over. How can there be a Protestant if the protest is over, right? That whole thing. That was incredible. And then it spread. And now all of a sudden we got all these, I don't know who these people are. The guy in the white's the Pope, I know that much. And that's Copeland. And that's Palmer, and the others are Protestants, quote unquote, American Protestants. Unity in diversity. Well, thank you anyhow. But it goes further than that. I don't know how well you can see it. It's kind of faded out. Okay, so this guy I think is Islamic. This would be Greek Orthodox. That's got to be like Hare Krishna, I don't know, Confucian or something like that. These guys are probably Sufi. I suppose these people back here are some form of Protestant or something. And this guy's obviously some sort of a Catholic, bishop or something, whatever. There's only one guy in that whole picture that I can even begin to resonate with at all. And you probably can't see him, but that's this guy back here. He's kind of looking up. He's like, how do I get out of here? He's probably actually Secret Service watching for snipers or something. I don't know what he is, but But mysticism is the common tie that holds these people together and draws them together. It's going to be a big thing. It is utterly, I should point out, let's see, I want to be right here. No, I'm getting all mixed up here. There we go. Some people have suggested or tried to apply the title of mystic to Ellen White. I would like to argue that there's a significant difference, okay? She vigorously denied this practice of being able to establish contact with deity whenever she wanted. Notice what she says. It is utterly false that I have ever intimated I could have a vision when I pleased. There is not a shade of truth in this. I have never said I could throw myself into visions when I pleased, for this is simply impossible. Every time, early in her ministry, there were people who said, she claimed she could have a vision whenever she wanted. And every time she addressed that, she's especially vehement. I never said that. It's impossible. It's like, whoa, calm down. I would read these statements. Whoa, who touched your button? It's like, wow. Well, there's a reason for it. There's a reason for it. And if you need any proof that she's not on the same page as all these other guys, bear in mind that all this stuff that they're doing is to establish contact with the deity, right? Notice how thrilled she was with that idea. I have felt for years that if I could have my choice and please God as well, I would rather die than have a vision. For every vision places me under great responsibility to bear testimonies of reproof and of warning which has ever been against my feelings. I don't think she's on the same page as our charismatic friends. That's all I intended to say on this topic. But just today, A friend sent me something that needs to be addressed. I covered it all in my book, Tremble. I hoped it would just go away, but apparently it hasn't. Maybe I should say a word or two about the book. It's not my favorite book. It's kind of distasteful in some ways, actually. I didn't really even want to write it. Kind of got tricked into it. It's a long story. I won't tell you about that right now. It covers the reintroduction of Kellogg's heresies and errors and pantheism and mysticism into the Adventist church. And it's not a happy thing to write about. And the very first question I had to pray over was, do I name names? How do I tell the story and not name names? And I looked for a way to not name names. And I couldn't come up with a way that was effective. So I named names in the book, as in contemporary names, people who are still alive and active. So I worked very, very hard to do justice to the subject without doing that, but when I saw that I had to do it, I said, I will do this as charitably as I possibly can. No aspersions, no accusations, no accusing, nothing but direct quotes. Give the benefit of doubt anytime you can. And so I wrote the book that way. I still did not enjoy it. But I am happy to say that no one ever criticized me or the book for a bad attitude. I don't know if that's a perfect victory or not, but that's where it sits. I hope to continue that. But as I said, something came up today that I think needs to be addressed. This is a letter from Sandra Roberts, the president of the Southeastern California Conference. It's addressed, the letter itself is not showing right there. The letter comes immediately under this part of the screen, Behal. It's addressed to Dear Pastor. Well, she didn't send it to me because I'm not a pastor, but anyhow, a couple of little quotes here from the letter. For over 25 years, the Southeastern California Conference has invested in the spiritual and personal development of our pastors through the Journey process. Journey. Notice S-E-C, Journey up there. S-E-C-C, Journey. About 150 pastors have participated in this process in the last 25 years. Expenses for the retreat are covered by the conference as an expression of their commitment to supporting you in ministry. So this is a free thing. If you're a pastor, they'll pay it for you, and you can go take it. The website continues on and explains that this program began in the early 1990s, so almost 30 years ago, and it is based largely on the, quotes, guidance and ministry of the Leadership Institute, which continues to be a rich resource and partner in our journey together. Since that time, the early 1990s, there have been over 24 generations. That's the name that they use for what everyone else would call a class. I don't know why, but they call it a generation. There have been over 24 generations, including pastors from all around the globe and from various denominations. So once again, this is a very ecumenical type of a thing. Notice it's the Leadership Institute, right? The Leadership Institute's flagship program, known as The Journey, includes, and I'm quoting from their materials, repeated encouragement to adopt mystical methods of worship, how-to instruction and daily practice of Lectio Divina. If you're not familiar with Lectio Divina, it is a method of blanking out the mind and establishing contact with the supernatural. One document tells of a woman's experience while walking the path of a labyrinth. Okay, just a word of explanation if you're not up to speed on this, and trust me, there's no good reason you should need to be up to speed on this. A labyrinth looks kind of like a maze, you know, the maze where you got the little mouse up here and the little cracker down here, and help the mousey get to the cracker, you know, that kind of thing, okay? But a maze has choices and dead ends and all that sort of thing. A labyrinth has no choices. The labyrinth is just a convoluted path, but there's no left turn or right turn. And the whole purpose of the thing is for you to walk it without having to think. Just shuts your brain down. So One document tells of a woman's experience while walking the path of a labyrinth, and it tells how, quotes, God spoke a series of two-word phrases to her. Here's the series. See what you make of it. I am. See, the labyrinth was set up so there was like 3 steps or 3 stations of the cross or something. I don't know, but three particular points going in and then 3 points coming out. So there's 6. Okay, so first thing God says is, I am. Well, that sounds like a very divine thing to say. Next one is, you are. What happened? Oh, I see what happened. Okay, anyhow. I am, you are, we are, they are, everything is, I am. Oh yeah, that would be pantheism, wouldn't it? Sorry, but that's what it is. Okay, back to our list. Minimal identification of apostasy. You will not be able to depend, this is not to find fault with anything. You're not going to just be able to wait till their monthly copy of the review comes up to tell you who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. That is not going to happen. It didn't happen in heaven. Nothing was done to help the other angels, remember? It didn't happen with Judas. Nothing was said about Judas. It didn't happen with Kellogg. Wait, we must work, but we must wait. Wait, not now. It's going to come to a head before anything is said and anything is done, and there's going to be minimal identification of that apostasy. And it will bring your faith to the test. I won't rule out knowledge and intelligence. Yes, there's a place for understanding God's will and God's word and God's work, and there's a place for intelligence, but intelligence alone will never get you through this crisis. It will bring your faith to the test. And finally, there will be a blatant rejection of at least the spirit of prophecy, and in many ways the Bible as well. That's what the storm and tempest is going to look like. The climax of rebellion always comes with the rejection of God's authority. Lucifer in heaven, Judas with Christ, Kellogg, In regard to final events, we've been told the very last deception of Satan will be to make of none effect the testimony of the Spirit of God. That's a terrible thing. But is the source, finally, at last, of full and complete clarity. For anyone who continues to trust the testimonies, the Bible, that disavowal will be a dividing line. Remember I said last night that Kellogg came close to pulling in Haskell and Butler? Did I say that in the meeting, or were they talking to them? Okay, yeah, he did. On emotion, they were old friends. Kellogg had done a lot of good things. Kellogg had saved Haskell's life on 3 occasions, I think he said. You got to like a guy who saved your life. I mean, it's polite to like him anyhow. But it was when Kellogg tried to get them to go away from Ellen White. They both said, no, doctor, I cannot follow you there. I have too much confidence in the spirit of prophecy. I have too much confidence in the Lord's word through that woman. I will not follow you there. That's what saved him. Okay, so that should be enough to provide a bit of a stress test for anybody's house. See if it'll stand the storm. Seems pretty clear that I've got some growing and ripening to do before the final harvest. Shouldn't be a surprise. If the grain were ripe, the harvest would be underway already. I'm going to guess that some of you have some growing to do too. Well, you may have cause for repentance. I do. Never let the devil push that over into discouragement. God is still in the business of saving everyone who will let him save them, right? Have you ever heard of a college class called remedial English or remedial math? Sometimes they call it bonehead English, right? English 101. It's for kids who are in college that just didn't really learn how to write before they got there. Or they don't know how to do whatever level of algebra they're supposed to do. So we got to get them up to speed. A remedial course. Notice this statement. God desires everyone to understand the hateful character of selfishness and to cooperate with Him in guarding His human family against its terrible deceptive power. The first result of the entrance of sin into the world was the birth of principles of selfishness. The design of the gospel is, by means of remedial missionary work, to confront this evil of selfishness and destroy its destructive power by establishing enterprises of benevolence. Who is being remedied? It's us. Remedial missionary work is for us. The divine physician has given us a prescription. What to do? What to do now? You know, there may be many things. There's one thing that stands out to me. It usually fits, maybe even better than it fits here. I think it fits here too, but a lot of times I end up doing my series of information at these little missionary training schools. Really fits well there. Notice what it says. Because so little effort has been made to engage young men and women in the missionary work which must be done to bring the gospel invitation to all, there is but one worker where there should be 100. The indifference which is manifested for suffering humanity is charged against churches and families and individuals. So, what's the point here? Right at the beginning? Oops. There we go, wrong button. There is something special about young men and women. I'm not sure exactly why. Remember that's, we've always said, it's the young men and women who will finish the work. Yes, it is. But it's not just because they have energy. Somehow or the other, they have a level of influence that goes away when you get older. Not sure why that is. Just seems wrong, but that's the way it works. Notice this next statement. It's my last statement, actually. Unless there are those who will devise means of turning to account the time, strength, and brains of the church members, there will be a great work left undone that ought to be done. Haphazard work will not answer. We want men, and I would add women, in the church who have ability to develop in the line of organizing and giving practical work to young men and women, in the line of relieving the wants of humanity, and working for the salvation of the souls of men, women, youth, and children. That's what our schools need to be doing. That's what our churches need to be doing. That's what our families need to be doing. That's what special ministries need to be doing. Is turning loose on the world a bunch of self-denying, self-sacrificing, intelligent young men and women that know how to manifest the character of God. Now, I think there's going to be a role for people with gray hair too. I hope so. But there's something special about those young ones. They carry an influence. When you're older, you can do things that they cannot do, but you don't have the same influence. It's different. It changes all through your life. When you're a teenager, you can do things that you can't do when you're 20s. When you're in that 20-something stage, in some ways, that's the peak of your influence. When you're older, you can pretend to be wise and all that sort of thing. You can have that kind of influence. But there's something special about the youth. And that's a point of focus that we need to work on. And that is where I will leave you. God bless.